I think someone else is better for you, is my guess. I think someone else is better for you, is my guess. I think someone else is better for you, is my guess.
Okay. Do I get any squeaking? I should not get squeaking, but we will see. Right. Okay, I just have to remember to record. Otherwise, it is being recorded anyhow. On Zoom. Oh my God. No, but you get down. I know it's a bother. And I know you're a wonderful, wonderful creature and all that kind of thing, but okay. Oh, all right. Good morning, Harry. Mostly. Hello, Harry. Hello, hello, hello. Your eggs are ready. Okay. Well, I'm just gonna go and get some tea. So All right, both of us sitting down. Okay, 'cause you can't see me. So I might as well put on my camera. I have a camera somewhere, I suppose. I don't know where. I don't know where the camera is. Sure, it's here. Oh, it's here. It's a dog. Whoa. Here, just a moment, dog. Bloop, bloop. Here, look. Just a moment. No, no, here. Are you seeing a dog? Yes, you see a wagging tail. Yes, yeah, you see the dog.
Is it a he? He also-
Okay. That is my slightly used dog. Like he's 4 years old. Yeah, so it's not a new dog. And in fact, I like having a slightly used dog, though this one actually acts like a brand new dog because it's as bouncy and crazy and da da da. And my God, this is not like a sedate, mature. Wouldn't even know how to spell that. How old is how old is she now? Oh, that's the same age as this one. This one is a lab boxer mix. I don't know what the mix is, but my God. Energy plus is right. So that is breakfast. I'm seeing a new configuration and I'm not seeing any head at all, but I love your eggs. Your eggs are gorgeous. And then your dog is kind of cute too.
Yeah, walk that morning with us. Grabbing blankets and bits of fake bow and wanting to chase around the house with them, weren't you?
Yeah. Well, I must say, 3 days after I got this dog, I took a really nasty fall. No, nothing broken, but lots of bruises and I think some pulled ligaments and stuff. So it's really meant I was, and plus it's icy out. So it's really put a crimp in things. So we're both here very nice and early. So
Yeah.
Paul Gregory has entered the waiting room, but I'm not ready. Okay. Paul, I can see that you're in the waiting room. I'm going to ask you, Paul, if you'll watch the talk between Harry and myself on the live link. It's right at the top of the page. And then I'm going to ask you to come in. And the reason is that Zoom doesn't give me an option for anything except everybody and one person. I can't just put two people because I don't have the webinar feature. What I have is just regular old Zoom. So, and I've just been saying hello to Harry on Skype, and now with this amazing technology, he's supposed to be coming in here on Zoom any old time. And I'm here as usual, a few minutes early. So since I'm not letting you in here, I may, however, tell you that Harry is one of these people I met early on. He's on the other side of the planet, which is to say Australia. On the other hand, he had first shared interest, Islam, and he wrote a book, which took him 5 years to write. And that was on the story of Muhammad. And so I got to know him over that. And then he's gone on to his own kind of many interests. And I'm just wondering where he is because he should be over here. I'm going to see where he is because he should be here. I'm going to see. Okay, I see you're here. All right. All right. Okay, so Harry, I'm glad you got over here. And I'm sure you're going to put your video on and your audio on.
There we go. Can you?
I can hear you, but I do not
Okay.
see you, though I can see how to spell your name.
I don't know why that's
Because
that
you have to
video.
go down. Okay, now I see you as
Do
well
I-
as hear you.
So get
Okay.
rid of the black background.
Okay, great. If you can lower it a little so that we're about the same height, our tops of our heads are about in the same place. Whoa. Rearranging the furniture.
So there isn't half a chair sticking out.
Okay, if you can you tilt the camera a little bit so you have a little tiny space above your head? Right. Okay. That's rabophobia. And
Leave us rabbits alone.
agoraphobia, meaning agora rabbits. Okay.
Okay.
I am going to do already now, because it is 3:01, I am going to push record. I'm going to introduce you, and we are going to get going. So I pushed record on this computer. Recording is in progress. Hello, this is Elsa, and I am very, very happy to welcome Harry Richardson, who has now completed his second book, and he's on to making videos about it. So that's not enough because lots of people write books and do videos. So why Harry? It's what the book is about. And it's also his approach to the book, which I, in fact, found a very, very kind of difficult to understand at the beginning. I'll talk about the book a little bit. It's on Anglophobia, the unrecognized hatred, the hatred of anything to do with Anglo culture, the English language, whites, Europeans, etc. Why did I object to this? Because after all, I did a video in 2010, which should have settled the thing, on proud to be white, saying white pride's also a good thing in addition to all the others. Well, of course, very few people saw it, like 300. But why did I have a problem with Harry's thing? Because it's so sedate, it's not dramatic and everything, but it was a choice. What I want Harry to talk about is partly what the book is about, and then also the choice of how he is bringing it out into the world. And I think that is so important, because I remember the first person I interviewed, Bill Warner, 2012, on Islam. You know, there had been the World Trade Center, et cetera. He'd learned about Islam. He said, okay, I'm going to write a book and it'll revolutionize the world. So he wrote Thought Persuasion, something like that. And nobody was interested. But he had the truth right there. No, it's factual persuasion. And I think that that is a huge thing. People think, I've got the truth. So this is not what you're doing. You're not just saying, look, Anglophobia is the truth. Because by the way, by now, if you are white and you are not aware that there is considerable prejudice culturally against you, colonialism, imperialism, undeserved privilege, racism, slave owner, etc., you know, you have had your head under the rock or you're utterly mind controlled. But anyway, instead of saying more, I'm going to pass it over to Harry and let him talk about the book and also what is he doing, what is the aim, and what are the steps, and what can we learn? So, Harry.
Okay, so the the book, as I said, with Anglophobia, the unrecognized hatred. So we've, as you mentioned, Elsa, I think more and more people are becoming aware that there is this animus towards white people generally, let's call it. Excuse me. And the question is, you know, is that such a bad thing? Firstly, I mean, if you listen to our opponents, they would say, well, it's good that people are, you know, pushing back against the white supremacists and that, you know, non-whites are finally having a day in the sun. But it really is more to it than that. Excuse me a second. So the attacks on us are so vitriolic at this stage that anything and everything that's connected to someone who is, say, white is just, people are vilified as being the worst. You know, the white race is the worst race. They're, you know, this, you know, they are, you know, monstrous enslavers. You know, the adjectives go on and on. Now, this, if you stop and think about it, this makes no sense, because the attack on us has always been that what the people who are attacking us are always saying is that we are trying to prevent racism, because racism is this awful sin where people are racist and they attack people on the basis of their skin color, which is unconscionable. And you say, well, what are you actually doing now? Oh, we're attacking you on the basis of your skin color. So it's the old good for the goose, but not good for the gander thing. So this is becoming more obvious, I think. I mean, it's if you were really paying attention, it's been obvious for a long time. But for most people, we were, you know, these things were couched in a way that made it seem reasonable. We have a few, you know, when I was younger, there was a small number of migrants into the country who were non-whites, and there were people who reacted against this and were sometimes violent towards them. Some people, you know, a lot of people really didn't feel comfortable. There were sometimes people, you know, sort of more thuggish people were, you know, rude or, you know, as I say, potentially even violent. So it was easy to say, well, you know, these people are fighting for decency and justice for this small minority. But that's not how it is anymore. We now have a massive numbers of minorities, non-white minorities, and they are often in positions of great power, and yet they claim that racism against whites is not racism. And the reason it's not racism because to be racist you need to have power, and only white people have power. Well, that's an argument that doesn't stack up at all, because if you go to China, white people don't have any power in China that I'm aware of, or they may have some influence in ways. If you go to India, whites don't have much power. Most of Africa, I mean, even South Africa, whites are not in a really good way in South Africa. If you're white, you can't get a job in the government. And even if we come to our own countries, like we look at the leading nation in the free world, the USA. A short time ago, they had a decade or so now, they had a black president. They have a black vice president. Many of their large cities are almost entirely their political office holders are almost entirely African American or other minorities. I did a video not long ago which you saw about Detroit. Almost the entirety of the political class in Detroit are minority, what we call minorities. Of course, in Detroit, African Americans are not a minority, I don't believe, or certainly in large swathes of Detroit. Much of Detroit is African American, which it was, a few decades ago. It was mostly white, and it was also the wealthiest city in the USA, and thought to be possibly even the wealthiest city in the world at the time. And then that changed over time as blacks took power. African Americans moved in, ethnic bloc voting.
What I want to bring you to is your tactic. I think we know some of those things, but you are not out just to write a book. You wrote a book with an academic, and it's quite an academic book. I don't mean it's difficult to understand. It's very, very easy to understand, but you go through it point by point by point by point by point. This kind of racism, anti-white, this and this and this and this, starting with this kind of thing, and on jobs and on violence. So it's really neatly, thoroughly laid out. But you're not sitting on your laurels. I don't even think you know what a laurel is. You might know what it is, or you might not, but you're not interested in laurels as far as I know. As far as I know, this was the beginning for you, this book that you wrote with an academic, Harry Salter. Frank Salter. You're Harry, he's Frank. Right. So you have this book, and you're not resting on anything. In fact, you've recently come up with a couple of videos. Why bother? Aren't they kind of crass instead of nicely academic? Why with the videos? Then you've coupled up with a stodgy old organization, the Anglo-Celtic
British Australian community. Yeah.
Yes, and they have funding. And so you are involved with this group and you are getting funding. Don't you think that's really crass? Going for funding? Why are you doing things like this, Harry?
Okay, so I think we both learned from the Islam thing that, as you were saying with Bill Warner, he said he did a lot of investigation and said, "Wow, I've got the truth. It's all over. I've got the truth now." So we're all good, and then realized that, hey everybody, and he's just this little lone voice crying out in the wilderness. There's a massive battle been going on for a long time, and when you wake up and think, I've got the truth now, I know what's going on, that's it, it's all over, what you don't realize is that it's like you've just stepped onto a battlefield and you're like, oh, I've suddenly realized there's a battlefield, so now it's all okay. It's like, well, no, you've got a whole battalion of people over there just waiting for you to step out that trench, and they're going to take your head off. This battle has been going on, and it's a battle that goes on surreptitiously below the surface. So most people are unaware of it. It rages through academia, it rages through the media, it rages through politics and the institutions. You've heard of, many of us are familiar with the term "the long march through the institutions." Well, this is not a joke. You go to a university and you talk about a subject like IQ differences, race and IQ differences, which were pretty well established. You know, it was it's not, and you know, there's still debate over it, but the debate's shifted, and most serious scientists would agree that there's, you know, if you take 1,000 sub-Saharan Africans or Australian Aboriginals, give them an IQ test, and then you take 1,000 Chinese or Anglos, there'll be variations and quite stark variations in differences in IQ. So it's a fairly easy thing to ascertain.
And I
But
know
if
what is
you
usually done. Okay, that's got to do because you're using examples which don't hold for Aborigines because you're not counting kangaroos. If you had hopping kangaroos, then Aborigines would outscore the Chinese because they don't know about kangaroos. Whereas the thing has to do actually with math. It doesn't matter if you're adding rabbits or kangaroos or ants.
yeah.
And so there's been so much trying to explain things away so that it doesn't really count, or to say there are many IQs. There's emotional intelligence, and then there's heart level intelligence, and then there's digital intelligence, and then there's athletic intelligence, etc. So in other words, there has been a real discomfort around it. And I know, as someone white, it's very comfortable for me to say, oh, but the Chinese and the Japanese outscore me. Because then it's not racist for me to say that there's an IQ difference. And no one, by the way, is holding that all Chinese people are smarter than all sub-Saharan Africans, or it's a group difference. It's like,
yeah, on an
women are not.
individual level, it doesn't matter because my IQ is my IQ. But if we take a group of whites and a group of Chinese or a group of Japanese or a group of or whatever, there's differences in IQ. Now, it's not just, so firstly, they come up with a whole bunch of you know, rhetoric that's, you know, as you just mentioned. But then, more importantly, anyone who mentions this or goes there, they will destroy you. I mean, destroy you. They will destroy your career. They'll destroy your reputation. They'll dox you. They'll you know. So the next thing, you got Antifa banging on your door. These people are not mucking around. They are brutal. You know, so they've fought this battle tooth and nail. And scientifically, the people who said race and IQ is real won the scientific debate, but the media portrayed it as if, no, those people who were talking about race and IQ, they're off their heads. They were idiots. They didn't know. Here's some real scientists, and they produce scientists who say, "Oh no, race and IQ is not real," you know, and the other scientists then lose their jobs. So so the scientists.
It's like with climate. It's with everything. It's one thing after another. It's like we're in favor of science, and if you happen to be in favor of science, off with your head. By the way, a very good thing for you is, when they go off with your head, you can say, yeah, but I'm not an academic. I am a tradesman. I am, like, so you can say, I am not one of these hoity-toities. So you can in fact take your in another place it might be low status, but here all of a sudden you're the winner.
Yeah,
good luck. An academic title.
Good luck destroying my academic career because I don't have one.
But I want to bring you back to what you're doing, because you are in it for the long haul, as far as I can see. And you have the book. I don't know if you're planning on other books, but you have now got 2 videos. You have some financial backing. And what's the highest numbers seen from one of the videos? I think you mentioned over 100,000.
Yeah, I think when I last checked, I think it was 145,000, which was pretty reasonable.
Right. What was that?
That was a short
one, or the one about?
Yeah, and it was a short from that video. It was actually we have a guy who does our videos, and he killed. We have a longer video, and they cut little shorts out and put them. So it was the section on Detroit. I was talking about Detroit, so I did a video, and as part of that, I talked about Detroit and the fall of Detroit from where it had been. And he cut that out and put it separately. And a gentleman called Elijah Schaefer shared it. He's got quite a big following on various platforms. He's actually he's an American, but he lives near me. He lives about 100 k's away from 80 miles away from me, 70 miles away from me on the Gold Coast. So yeah, he shared that with a lot of traction. Now, so we're getting traction, but you can see it's being stamped. Of course, we're being suppressed, but we get these breakouts. But I think what you're wanting to hear about is my the strategy that we've gone with. So as you know, my first book I wrote myself, and I'm not being an academic, I tend to bring out more rhetoric and a more, I don't know, my first book was, you say, more sexy. My talent is being able to write things in a way that sort of grab people. And so it was a very easy.
It was intentional. You told me it took you 5
Yeah,
years not to take Bill Warner's very dry academic stuff. I remember all those
which was
people
easily
beating
readable.
down his door. Easy to read, but certainly not riveting. And you got it to something where I believe the last I saw there were 750,000 downloads of your book, which is an incredible achievement.
Yeah.
And you
I sold
something.
35,000.
Yeah, so it's
35,000, but plus it's still selling, it still sells.
right.
So
it's the life of Muhammad. You would think, and you again, you used a strategy. You didn't hit people with the horrors. You took a strategy of how do I pull people in? Because you were not preaching to the choir. You wanted people who didn't have a clue about Muhammad to start reading and get sucked in. So again, you're a strategy person. And I think not being alone, by the way, the first time you were with the loose group of, there are a lot of people, relatively speaking, interested in Islam. And I remember at that time I had two big interests. One is the anti-thinking going on in society, and I did a lot of writing on it. And actually a smaller one in Islam. But the anti-thinking, I wasn't part of a group. There was nobody else I saw doing what I was doing. So I was really like a lone voice. And yes, I had my readers, but it was like my readers, but I didn't connect with like Bill Warner and Mark Dury and David Wood. So I didn't have a sense of even a community I didn't know. It was just like me, lone voice. This time you're more of a lone voice. Like there are a lot of people, but I don't see a movement yet. Are you aiming to start one?
Absolutely. I mean, that's always my aim. Yeah, and what the way we've gone about it, which I think you were alluding to, is this time, as you've noted, that the book is more academic. I mean, it was written with an academic, so it was with Frank, and Frank is very strategic as well. And the goal, which Frank pushed more. I mean, I'm always trying to make the stuff more accessible to ordinary people, but Frank's point was this needs to be academically very rigorous, because the people that we want to get in are going to be we want high quality people. It's great having a mass movement of ordinary people, but for one thing, most of them don't do a lot. And for another thing, most of them don't have a lot of power. So the problem we have is that often people in power, there's quite, like probably the majority of people in power are not on my side, I would say. But there's probably a significant minority who would be open to our ideas, but are terrified, literally terrified. Like I was saying with the race and IQ, the same thing with politics. If you're in politics and you say, hey, I'm against anti-white racism, you will be portrayed as literally Hitler. You know it. So there are people who can constantly complain the Australian Parliament's far too white. There's too many white people in the Australian Parliament, but we don't have anyone in that Parliament who is an advocate for the white community. Not a single person. There's probably a dozen. I don't know numbers, but I could guess there'd be at least a dozen who would openly admit to being advocates for the Aboriginal community. And good on them, But and they are, you know, they're not harassed. They're not. No one says that they're monsters or horrible people. But if you were to stand up and say, "Hey, I'm going to advocate for the traditional white Australians," you would be attacked like nothing else. So
Yeah, what if you
people
said
in power,
just, what if you said just one of those people, do you know, I really do like having an ethnic mix here and a racial mix, but I would like to keep a white majority. You know,
that,
that's
that's
so I think probably I know that in Vancouver, the west coast of Canada, country I live, the immigration in the most recent year I saw was 97.5% non-white. And yet the original settlers were not the Indians, but the original non-Indian settlers,
mm,
non-Aboriginal settlers were white. Now, to
they
go
built
from
who
that to
built the country.
97.5%, that's not even 50-50. And with the numbers of Canadian immigration, within 10 years, uh, forget it,
You're going to be a tiny minority. So
a small
immigration is something
minority.
that's every community. Immigration is something that's a benefit to a community. So for yourself, as you say, I know you, Elsie, you have no animosity towards someone because they happen to be a different color or a different race or whatever. But when you live in a place, you naturally prefer to be living amongst your own people, and that's a human universal.
Well,
Every
actually,
person,
it's kind of blurry because what my own people is, and Montreal
yeah,
has got lots of little. There's the Greek community, there's the Italian
yeah.
community, even there's a Haitian community. There's this and that. So, but what is it if? And if I go and I'm in Barbados, I expect to be in a 90+% non-white community. And if I go down to Colombia, I expect to be among where the whites are darker than I am because they're Spanish background, and that there's a large Native South American, Native Indian population. So I expect to be in the minority, and I'm all fine with that.
Hmm.
But I'm going, it wasn't even up for debate. How do we feel about this? At what point? What about cultural differences? How much do I care that the cultures, because there's just been such a recent fight for women's equality, racial equality, gay rights. Well, you bring in like the Islamic culture, which definitely is not for gay rights. It isn't even for women's rights, but gay rights, like I don't know, you have the right not to exist, I believe. Um, so all of these should be valid questions, and you shouldn't be trounced. Between us, we can talk about it, but I know that those are incredibly hot topics. So how do you plan to get people to talk? Are you planning to go into politics, for example? Or what do you want to do? How do you want to
But
do things?
politics is a black hole for your time. I mean, my view of politics is that politicians are like weather vanes. So they point which way the wind goes. So people say, "Oh, we need different politicians." You get different politicians; they'll do exactly the same thing because they all tend to go the way that the wind goes. And if they try and go against it, they get broken off. So our job is to change the wind, the direction of the wind. So the politics is downstream from culture, and we need to. It's no good changing the politics. You need to change the culture and the way people look at things. So the book and what we do, we're really bringing out solid justifications and examples of how just academically looking at racism and saying that these arguments, because the arguments that are made against us are flimsy to say the least, but they tend to win because they're backed up by aggression and force. And most academics are terrified. They're not. You don't become an academic because you're a brave person. Most academics are not particularly brave. There's a small minority, but most of them are not. So what we're doing is really basically taking these arguments and exposing them in the light of day and tearing them to pieces and showing that these, the whole edifice is built on sand. And in doing so, what we're doing is trying to provide a framework people can grab hold of, because what politicians have lacked is a framework, because the academic framework has been taken away, because again, the long march through the institutions, all of these academics and the media, it played their part in doing this. They destroyed academics who were opposed. So we're trying to put back proper, rigorous, academic things. For instance, my first book, although it was very successful, no one would quote it academically. It's something like people will read it and go, wow, yeah, that's, it gels with people. But academics will not quote it. It's not quotable. It's not written in an academically rigorous way. I believe it's correct. As far as I can tell, it's correct. I actually put a $1,000 reward for anyone who can prove it wrong. And it's sold 35,000 copies. Hundreds of thousands of people have read it online. No, I still have the $1,000. So as far as I know, it's correct. But academics are like, no, well, I can't quote it because it's not academically rigorous or whatever. Whereas the Anglophobia is very academically rigorous. It's written in a way that's an academic cannot tear it apart. I had some academic, often the people who criticized my first book were generally academics. They weren't Muslims, strangely enough. They were academics. I made the mistake of quoting Wikipedia in there. Most of my book was based on original quotes, but some of the examples I put in quotes from Wikipedia. Oh, that's it. He's quoting Wikipedia. He's not an academic. That's it. It all falls down. It's just garbage arguments, really. But for an academic, it's not academically rigorous, so we can't quote it. So this book that we've done now is quotable, and people, serious academics who read it, can look at this as an academic book, and so it provides cover for them. It provides arguments. It provides logical arguments for the reasoning that we have. And what we're trying to do is to attract these high quality, high value people who have power, and to bring them around, and and to bring there are groups which are over here and probably in Canada too, which are very low level, thuggish. We're white and we're proud of it. F you, fuck off, we're full. All this kind of stuff. You're not going to attract those groups. Do not attract high quality people. I'm not saying ever. I mean, some of the people in those groups are actually, there are intelligent people, but they have no power. People who are able to garner power are people who are very cognizant of the terrain, and they're very careful in what they do. And those people, we've created something which those people can say, I'm not afraid to promote this idea or to grasp onto this idea. So that's what our raison d'etre was for the way that we did it, rather than writing the book in a way that was going to be a mass seller, super popular book, which I think it's harder these days actually to have a success with a book. I think even since I released my book in 2013, I think selling books today is much harder. You can't even get people to watch a movie today. I was talking to a gentleman the other day from the Libertarian Party. He's one of the high ups in the Libertarian Party, and his job, he teaches film in a university. He's very high up, as he's very high up in the film industry. He's very high up in the university, and he said, you know what my biggest problem with film students is? I said, no, what's that? He said, it's getting film students to watch a film.
There is really that thing that I remember reading books all the way through. And now it's like, just give me an article. And it's like, there's not that much detailed attention. I just want now, if you have a line or two summarizing. I had a couple of thoughts, and one is a book by Niall Ferguson about the 6 strengths of the European culture. It's like the work ethic and I can't remember what they are, the inventiveness, etc. That your book, I think, would fit really well with that book, because you give what Anglophobia is, and then, oh, by the way, would you like to know some strengths of our culture? And he argues it very, very well. the second thing that I was thinking, which has fled from my mind now, is that your book gives a framework, whereas that there's so many isolated incidents all over the place. Like before we got started talking, you just mentioned an incident where 4 Black teenagers from sub-Saharan Africa or somewhere like that had just beaten to death a white grandmother in front of her 6-year-old granddaughter. And the white elected official, government official, was very concerned about we mustn't be racist against Blacks, as opposed to, is there a problem in that community? Does that community have a disproportionate number of violence? If so, what can we do? Also, what is the ideology of people coming in? We need to look at ideology, but your book gives a central, like a building, boom, and then you can look at all these many incidents. Like you showed a video, I think, of a statue of some hero being broken down, and he's somebody that people who are not white should see as a hero, but clearly they don't, because the problem is he's got the wrong color, or he did until he got toppled. But anyhow, did you have some last words? And I want to throw it open to discussion.
What I'm sort of looking at now, my next video as well, what I'm doing, is that the whole, the central core to the battle has been that our enemies, what they've done is they've created a paradigm where we started off with a white majority, and we had a small minority, and so we had basically conflicts between minority groups and majority white groups, where over various things, and one of them being immigration. So the minority wanted immigration from non-white countries, right? The non-white minority, and the great majority of whites said, well, no, we want to carry on having immigration only from white countries so we can stay in the majority. And who won? Well, the minorities won. And in every conflict of this type, the minorities always win. A grandmother gets stabbed to death. Who wins? The minority. Okay, the premier stands up and says, "Oh, we have to be careful not to be against the African community." Blah, blah. So how did they do this?
This is a humanitarian hoax.
Yeah, but how do they do this? And the reason that they're so successful is because they've framed this whole thing that if you are when you're running this fight, what you have to do, you can have a huge crowd of people and a small group of you get together and say we'll have a group strategy, so we will all work together and we can defeat, like the Nazis came to power. There were quite a small number of Nazis in Germany comparative to the major population, but they all stuck together and said we will, and they basically took over the whole group because they had a group strategy, but everyone else is working as an individual. And this is how it's been framed. So they framed it so what the small non-white minorities were allowed to work as a collective, as a group, and the majority were told you must not under any circumstances work as a group. And they invented this word, racism. If you work as a group, that's racism, and it's the worst thing you can possibly do. But we can't be racist. We can work as a group, and that's not racist. Why is that not racist? And they come up with, we cover that in Anglophobia, so they come up with all these arguments. And once they pushed that through and managed to get people to accept it, okay, I'm white, I must be just me, I can't be part of a community. These people have their own community and they can fight for their own community, but I can't fight for my community. So I'm just an individual and I'm fighting against this community of people. I'm going to lose every time. And that has been the central core.
I'm going to say there's one thing beyond that, and I believe that there is also mind control and brainwashing, that yes, there is a group strategy, but there is a group power that is pushing that strategy through, so that, especially near the beginning. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, if you are on YouTube, what I'd like you to do, because otherwise there'll be a feedback loop, you can just turn YouTube off so it stops playing, or you can close the page. And the other thing is come to the link that you have, the link that I sent the people who asked. I'm seeing one person, Paul Gregory, you have been there faithfully from the beginning. But if there are other people, because I know there were about 8 people who asked for the link. So if any of you is around and would like to come and join the discussion, we would very much welcome you. Otherwise, Paul, it is a pleasure to welcome you, and I will now push admit. So you are the only person that I have seen. Paul Gregory is joining. Paul Gregory has joined, but he has no sound and no video, and he will. I don't see anyone else right now joining us, which is all fine. A couple of times ago, there were 3 of us, and it ended up being just a brilliant discussion. But we will see who, if anyone, joins us. Hello, Paul.
Welcome, Paul. How are
So
you?
I know you've been here from the beginning, Paul. I know that because I saw your, hi, I'm here.
Yes, I realized. I wasn't quite sure at the beginning what the routine was to be, but then I understood. So I've been watching and listening on YouTube, and I've just closed YouTube, and we'll see how it goes.
I should go just fine. It's just the first time I tried it, I didn't realize that this would play on YouTube and we would hear it 3 seconds later on YouTube. It didn't matter if it was me or anybody else. So, but anyway, if you've heard it all, you will know the discussion, you will know the points, and especially the last point that you were making, Harry, about the importance of working as a group. And that even if we are a small group, a small minority of quote unquote Anglos, and I know that's your term and it doesn't work where I am because Anglos are English speaking background and Francos are the French speaking, but I totally understand what you're saying. That if we work as a group and we have each other's backs, and if somebody says, but it's racist, you go, no. It's really important to act as a group, like women as a group, gays as a group, men as a group. It's very important to have everyone recognizing and exploring, what do I need as a group? And so did you want to say anything else, Harry, or shall we throw it over to our so far silent person?
Let's hear from Paul. Where are you, Paul? Are you in Canada as well?
No, I'm deepest France. I'm south of Vichy.
Okay.
All right, but I was 40 years in Germany, and I saw the writing on the wall, and I left Berlin at the end of 2016.
Yeah.
I'm very pleased to be here rather than most other places in the world.
Yeah.
This thing about groups, perhaps I can say 1 or 2 things about that, not directly. I mean, generally speaking, this is not a topic which I've personally had to confront, which I've had, dealings with. I'm sort of aware of it, and I'm absolutely horrified at what's been going on. But let me just say a couple of things about groups. There was a situation in the United Kingdom recently where a mother was complaining about how her daughter was being introduced to these transgender ideas. I mean, a very young daughter at that. And so she complained to the school or to the teachers or headmaster or whatever. And then she tried to communicate with other parents who were or might have been, similarly disturbed at what was happening. Whereupon she got charged with harassment. You can't go around bullying the teachers. All of you parents clubbing together so you can sort of club the teacher or the headmistress or whoever. That was one thing I'd like to communicate. Another is there is a man whose name escapes me, a British man who came to Britain, I think, as a young boy, and he's completely black, and he established himself very well. I think he did a science degree, and he had some kind of senior position for fighting prejudice, and he abandoned this position, or he resigned from it, or he was thrown out, or whatever. I'm not sure. Eventually, but why when he had it, at one point he was sort of on a tour, and he went to a large school to address the senior pupils, and he noticed something. He saw that all of the white kids were together, and all of the black kids were together, and all of the Asian kids were together. At different, some, in the hall or in the assembly area, whatever. And he asked them about that. I said, why? And the pupils explained, we don't have any problems with each other. It just works out like that. That somehow or other we just join together. The white sort of white pupils, as it were, stick together with the white pupils, and the Asians with the Asians, and the blacks with the blacks, and that's how it is. And it's there's no aggression about it. There's no exclusion about it. It just works out that way. So there's something sort of natural about people, as it were, well, birds of a feather flock together. I'd like
It's
to
a
come
human
back.
universal. It's a human universal.
Yes, yes. I'd like to come back to something else you said much earlier, halfway through. I have to say I missed a couple of bits, but I think I got the gist. And you were talking about politicians, and you were making some generalizations about politicians. And I have a particular line on this, a quite unique line as far as I can make out, sadly. And I say the problem is that all of these politicians are party people. They all belong to parties, political parties. Now, if you go back to the 20th or the 19th century, there were very good reasons for having political parties.
I'm going to
Right.
want to, can we deal with one question, one thing at a time? Because I'm getting three different points from you, one after another.
Yeah, okay, sure.
Yeah,
Okay,
because and then
I
at
can
the
say
end,
that
at
later.
the
Yeah.
end of it, I'll have completely forgotten the first one, because your second one was about the natural tendency for
Yeah,
people
yes.
to group
The
together.
gentleman,
The-
the
the
gentleman you're
birds of
talking about was
birds
called
of
Trevor Phillips, I think. I think it was Trevor Phillips. He was a black gentleman who was a race relations commissioner for Tony Blair, and was
Yeah.
quite a good guy. Yeah.
Yeah, but one of the things I'm remembering from Tommy Robinson was he was saying at his school he did not have that experience. He remembered in Luton an incredible mix of most students. So one of his best friends was Jamaican, and Tommy Robinson is white, and that he remembered in his school, which was extremely ethnically mixed, where there were loads and loads of immigrants, from loads of Polish immigrants, like so it was a really mixed bag. That students tended to, and there was not I don't think there was a big enough group for the Asians to sit together. And, in other words, it was a melting pot, except that he found that the Islamic students all sat apart, that they did not mix in the general melting pot. So that would have been a different experience. And I'm not saying it had to be one way or another. One of the differences I remember as a child is girl boy, and they in fact split the schoolyard, so the girls couldn't go there and the boys couldn't go there. So there was that girl boy playing different games, different spaces. And so I didn't know what the thing was. And I'm remembering at a school where I taught, there were invisible mixes that I didn't see, who's Greek and who's Italian. But there was one group where you just couldn't go in unless you belonged, and that was black. And the blacks took over the nicest part of the cafeteria, lovely brick, and everyone else got this sort of, the cheap plywood and blah, etc. They took over this very nice area and you'd better be black in there. I tended to arrive very early, get a breakfast early. I like this area, but I noticed that everyone coming in sitting, and as a professor, you can sit where you like. Your students will not harass you. But apparently it was even something that if somebody black was going out with somebody white, still wasn't quite the right space for you. So all of those things. So I don't know about how that ties in with things. It doesn't tie in with the large thing about how do we make things comfortable for white students, and now often Jewish students who are now getting harassed throughout North America, as far as I can get from the news, though I'm, not near an academic environment right now. So that was my thought for you, Paul, in terms of what you said. I don't know if you had something on that, Harry. And I already got
Well,
your first point because it was different.
there is overlap, of course, but you find, particularly you notice it in churches, because in most spaces they enforce this, or they do the best to enforce a mix of people. But when people are left alone, they self-segregate, as Paul said. There's a tendency to. So you can go to churches, and you'll find the churches will be either, over here we have Chinese churches, we have Indonesian churches, and then there are churches which would be largely white, and so forth. So people have a tendency to self-segregate racially. Now, it's not that doesn't mean that people won't have interactions or friendships or even deep friendships, relationships with other races, but on the whole, most people, as I say, it's a human universe. We covered this in the book, and we mentioned this. Your quote there: "Birds of a feather flock together." Is people tend to feel comfortable with people of their own. There are, people who look like you. That's just normal. And Elsie, you mentioned before, in your city, you have a Haitian community, you have a Greek community, you have an Italian community. Why do we have these communities? Why don't people just spread out and say, "Hey, I'm just me"? We don't. We live in groups. We're a tribal creature. We're not like cats. We're like dogs. We have our own little pack, and we feel comfortable in that. And there's good reasons for that. Because I mean, in the civilized West, you can walk around in most places and be okay. But when things start to go pear-shaped, you depend on group. If you get thrown into jail in the US, for instance, you're going to get there's a good chance you get given a choice of joining some horrendous racist white Aryan pride group, with tattoos and everything, and being told to attack blacks, or else be an individual, in which case you'll be taken by a black gang and used as entertainment for the next 3 years. And the only question you really have would be, where do I sign? When things are rough, you join your group and you fight as a group. You can't fight as an individual against a group. So humans are group animals. We're tribal, and in pre-modern times, that was survival. You hung with your group, and if you get caught out with another group, they'll kill you. Literally kill you.
Some of that was also very discriminatory, because one of the things I come from a very class conscious society, where in fact one of my cousins from a low level hospital employee thing, and she married an engineer, an architect, very high status person, and in fact, so it was something that his parents were very accepting of her. So like that, there's a real class consciousness in Austria based on the class of your parents, not she was a school teacher, and in Canada you wouldn't have noticed the class difference. In fact, one of the things that my parents noticed was the much lesser class difference, and one of the things they did not want is the class segregation. So in terms of everyone hanging out with their own group, there, in many ways, there are also incredible limitations on that when there's an order, like a denigration of the people who are working class, lower middle class, etc., And on the other hand, the snotty rich, so I'm not just going to accept, oh yeah, we just hang out in groups. I'm going to say that there is really something to the individual thing about appreciating who that individual is. And in terms of not hanging out as a group, what my father did is his friends were all over the place. Like basically, if you were already in one of the groups my father had a friend in, don't apply. He already has an Indian friend. He has a black friend. He has a French Canadian friend. He has two Jewish friends, etc. So so I grew up in a anti-group household.
I get that totally. One of the really great things I love about Australia is exactly the same. It has much lower class structure. In the UK, as a an engineering tradesman, I was just down here in Australia. I have friends who are lawyers, doctors,
Mhm.
anything, and you would be really accepted in far more than you would in the UK. And I really like that. And I'm also someone who has sort of goes across groups very, very easily. I used to Thai box. I told you that I used to go into Thai boxing, and when I lived in London, I used to Thai box in a place called Brixton, which, if anyone knows London, was the blackest part of London, and everyone in that group was black, apart from me. They're all West Indian blacks at that stage. I generally feel pretty comfortable. I agree with you. I like being able to move across different groups and seeing these different things. And this is where the diversity things come from. But at the same time, that doesn't mean I want to go and live in a suburb which is entirely Chinese or entirely South Sea Islander or entirely Maori. I actually like, generally speaking, I feel comfortable amongst my own people. I don't. It's not that I dislike people of other races, but I have this, as Paul was saying, or was it Paul, or were you saying that people just generally feel comfortable, they'll sort of self-segregate to an extent, and they should be allowed to, and they should be
Yeah.
allowed to, to promote their own group interests, which everybody else is, but we're not. And this is my point, that we need to say, okay, well, everyone else has their group interests. We're good with that. Okay, you pursue your group interests, but we will pursue ours. That's
I
our point,
remember,
and it's a strong point.
remember your little video on immigration? Somebody was interviewing people from non-white backgrounds. Do you want more immigrate? You want more immigration? Yes, I want more people from my background. So they were very out there up front from, I want more people like me.
Yeah, we all do.
Filipino, whatever. I want to, in other words, I want to be able to have a Filipino community, or I want to be able to have a West Indian community. So that, and the thing is, if you say the same thing as white, then you are seen as racist, whereas the other people are not.
Exactly. This is the core. This is the whole core of how it's worked. Australia has our most famous historian was a guy called Geoffrey Blainey, and in the 1980s, he remarked. He said the Asian community in Australia at that time was tiny. It was a very small proportion. Maybe wouldn't even been 1%. I think maybe it was 1%. But he said they get 30% of the immigration intake. He said, how is 1% of the population getting 30% of the immigration? Because this is a benefit. As you say, everybody wants this. We all want our own people coming in so that our own community is strengthened. How is it that they, with this tiny number, are able to beat out everyone else and get 30% of their group in the immigration thing? How do they do that? And it's because they are allowed to say, this is what we want, and we are not. This is the crux of the whole thing. They have a group strategy. They're allowed to have a group strategy, and we're not. How do we beat that? Well, we have to insist that we have interests and we are allowed to pursue our group strategy, which is the core of Anglophobia. That was the core message. Paul, you were going to say?
I see something else. It's a matter of intellectual honesty. These people are contradicting themselves, and I'm an advocate of intellectual honesty, of truthfulness. and of the rule of reason, in not everywhere, but in important areas. And no, they're attacking the very essence of our civilization, which is intellectual honesty.
Yeah.
Right, and
Because
no,
it suits them.
I have there's no, we don't have to, they're not honest. This is just dishonesty. Full stop.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was where Anglophobia went. That was one of our main points. Was we took these arguments and we took them apart and dissected them. And what's the word for it? What's the word that they use these days? That unpacking something. The left has a word for it, and we just showed that these were dishonest, hypocritical, and so forth. So that was the way that the book works. It just takes apart all this rhetoric from the left, which is actually, as you say, dishonest, deeply dishonest, and they just repeat it, and they've had a monopoly on the media, and the media have repeated it, and anyone who tries to disagree is attacked. So people all go quiet. This is how they've won. So how do we take that back? We fight for honesty and intellectual honesty. Absolutely, I'm a massive fan of that. So it's a very good point, Paul. Yeah.
The thing about the media is, of course, another area. How has it come about that the media has been taking this line? And there are various explanations which can be given there. And there are certainly dark forces which have come to light the last few years who have been steering these kind of developments.
Yeah, that's a whole nother swamp to get into.
It is such an important one, because you're not only dealing with Joe Blow, who wrote the article, and Joe Blow's editor. You're talking about a mass thing across the mainstream.
Something around 96% of the media is owned by 6 huge conglomerates, and those media conglomerates, if you look at the boards of directors, the same people are on all the boards of these different conglomerates. So it's almost entirely a single one. And then we had a glimpse also with the Twitter files. I don't know if you follow the Twitter files.
Yes.
Matt Taibbi, I'm not sure how to pronounce Taibbi, where Elon Musk released the transcripts of all the internal workings in Twitter before he took over. And the FBI and the CIA and the government were coming into Twitter and saying, right, we want this person black banned, we want this person shut down. So there was a collaboration between media, government, and what Donald Trump quite rightly labels the swamp. So there's this whole sort of group of people who have their own interests, which are opposed to the interests of the ordinary people, who are using these things to manipulate. Because in a democracy, media is everything. I mean, even outside of a democracy, but a democracy in particular, media is paramount. So control of the media is, if you're looking for bad people, go and figure out who's controlling the media. If you want to know who's got the power and who's strings.
Because they're not in favor of the majority, and they're not in the favor of human rights. They're not in favor of thinking on one thing after another after another. For example, ideologically, if you have a society which is espousing lots of human rights, it is not to the benefit of that society to have more than a marginal intake of people with a very different ideology. So if you say, okay, it doesn't matter if they're Muslim, but what's their ideology? And also, what country do they come from? Somebody was talking about the 4 migrants who beat to death the grandmother. Well, they came, you said, from a place where there is an incredible amount of violence, which people bring with them. They don't leave their ideology at the door. It's something you take with you. I'm remembering in my classes on valuing and evaluating diversity, I'm remembering fairly recent immigrants from Muslim countries talking about the incredible anti-Semitism in the countries where they came from, where one student really stands out for me. He was saying that he was years in Canada before he could recognize that a Jew might be a human being. It just wasn't what was taught. It was so deeply inculcated in him. And you could just hear like a shudder go through the class, because I had maybe 4 to 6 Muslim students, because the class is very diverse. So there are different racial groups. There would be a white majority, but not a large white majority, Indian, yellow skin, like if they were Japanese or Chinese or Vietnamese, you know, it was all over the place. But I think that that person, you could just feel that that person had betrayed his culture by telling the truth into the class, which was a very safe place in terms of people talk about bringing their prejudices with them. But my point there is, what is being done to our society is not to the benefit of the inhabitants of the society, the people who work for Votes for Women, or the people who are voting for have a smaller family because we don't want to overpopulate the world. Then what are you doing letting in people who have 6 and 8 children? If you're saying have a smaller reproductive rate, so we slowly have our population go down, you don't import people who are going to double. And it's going to take you 2 generations to teach these people to have a smaller number of children. If the ideology is have small families, you need immigrants who are going to have 1 to 3 children, or you know, or they will in another generation or 2 swamp.
Well, then the argument they say is, well, but we're not having enough children, so we need to bring
I
them
know,
back.
I know, this contradiction. Have fewer children, and then when you
Intellectual
have fewer
dishonesty.
children, we need to
Yeah.
go and we need to take people with a different ideology, anti-woman, anti-gay, male aggression, etc. So they have all the ideology that we are trying to breed out of people, teach out of people that come with, and they have lots of children.
It's
So
almost like they don't like us and they're trying to replace us.
almost. So yes, those 2 things. I'm remembering the eureka I had when it hit me, because I had grown up with don't have many children, which made sense to me. But then I realized for years I've been getting, there aren't enough children, therefore you need to import people who have many children. And no look at ideology, no look at religion, no look at, yeah.
Elsa,
No,
you're a very smart person. You made, were you a professor? You're a PhD,
yes,
you're a doctor,
yes.
and it took you years to realize this. But
Yes.
most of us, we don't think through even simple stuff. We accept it because it's this is what brainwashing is. Everyone else accepts it, so it's probably true, and usually it is.
Well, I think what it
We
is if
don't.
you're highly educated, you'll accept it. If you're not well educated, you're most likely to say, "Oh, they're so stupid." So uneducated people are less likely to be liberal than highly educated. So it's almost, you have to be indoctrinated to be a good liberal and believe in your inherent racism.
The education system's becoming an indoctrination
Yeah,
system. It's
yeah.
very so yeah.
Did you have another thought, Paul, or am I just swamping things?
Well, I'm all over the place here. There are so many different avenues we could go through. Um, I mean, this is all so basic and so obvious.
Yes.
The one point I'd make is a major problem is that we now have a generation of people who are totally uninformed. Part of this sort of Anglophobia is the idea that somehow or other there was this nasty imperialism, first of all from the British and the French, and then later from the Americans. Well, British imperialism in the form of the Royal Navy largely put an end to slavery in the world, which was endemic in Africa, Black Africa, and in the Muslim countries. When Africans were deported over the Atlantic to the United States, in a sense, this was numerically and in terms of its, moral constituents, it was not so very different to black Africans being exported to the Arab countries, where they could then join with slaves who had been stolen from the western coasts of Britain and of France. And it was only in the beginning of the 20th century that the Royal Navy explained to the Turks that if they continued auctioning white women, all right, the Royal Navy would bombard Istanbul, and the Turks gave way. Now, those are things which need to be said and need to be common knowledge. All of this anti-Americanism, we have so much to thank the United States as it was between, shall we say, 1870 and 1970, in terms of, just in our daily lives. Okay, it is true that it was the Italians, the Germans, the French, the British who started on this route, but I think a great deal of our everyday conveniences come from the United States. I'm very glad to have a dishwasher, to have a washing machine, to have an electric toothbrush, and much else. And I don't think I can't remember that the Arabs or the Muslims invented any of these things, or Africa did, or even the Chinese did, or the Japanese, who simply followed and refined things which had already been invented mainly by Americans.
I say to people, if we take a time slice of 500 years from 1450 AD through to 1950 AD, so we've got a time slice. At the beginning of that slice, people had horses. A horse riding a horse was the fastest you could travel horizontally on this planet. Yeah, they were ploughing the ground with horses and bullock carts and such like. They had sailboats. Pretty much nothing else. I don't think they had printing at that stage. Go ahead 500 years to 1950. We'd split the atom. We were a decade away from putting a man on the moon. We'd invented the steam engine, the petrol engine, the diesel engine, the jet engine, the rocket engine. We've got televisions. We've got cinemas. We've got air conditioning. We've got computers. We've got we've invented modernity, the entire thing. During that period from 1450 to 1950, how many inventions can you name that did not come out from Europe, as let's call it Greater Europe, so Australia, America, Canada. How many inventions can you think of during that 500-year slice that were not invented by white Europeans? I can't off the top of my head, I can't think of a single one. And yet we invented almost everything.
There's well, one thing is you left out dentistry. If you never had toothache,
Medicine,
right, but and anesthetics, right. But the more important point is that it was only thanks to the mechanization of agriculture that we've actually been able to feed all of these millions.
Yeah.
If you go back simply to the end of the Second World War, in a country such as Switzerland, they basically used slave labor, orphans or whoever, who would work the land, because they did not have the mechanized farming. Now we've entered a different age, of course, as we've become aware the last several years or the last few decades, with completely new developments which are far less good. But certainly you go back, and this has to, people are just forgetting these very obvious things. And they need to be said, and they have to be taught in schools. Just learn
absolutely.
History. Either learn science or learn history, but true history.
That brings us back to doing it. And that's why I brought on Harry, because he is both a dreamer and a doer. He's got the dream of, I want an Australia which is at least 60% white, you know, whatever, I don't know,
where you
75.
won't get stabbed to death for, you know, so
And
someone
you
will
don't get
steal
stabbed to death for saying that. Okay, so he's a dreamer, but he's a doer with all these things, because what I see is, yes, I want to put the education. It's going to take other people, and it's going to take, there's so much, and that's why I'm seeing also the importance of group power. When I did my one little video on, you know, Proud to be White, 2010, and it sank like a stone. Actually, it's up on YouTube. It's not a danger to anybody. It can be around, and maybe if another 300 out of the 8 billion people see it, it still won't be a danger to anybody. But what you are doing, what you want, it's much more that connected thing. And I've been doing a lot of stuff for Reiner, his case. So we're not doing a lot of stuff. I'm just, you know, letting people know what's being said in German. I translate it because there's a lot of people who don't speak German, and I happen to speak German and English. Anyhow, what he was a popularizer. He drew people together and he got the word out. And that's what we need. We need more hubs and radiators. So that's what I liked about your strategy. I didn't know exactly where you were going, but I saw that every step was just a building, not just was building also towards another bigger step. Whether it was going on a speaking tour, whether it was whatever it was, whether it was a children's book that would be out that could be taught to kids, whatever. So it's like, and that what I see is, you said you want to attract top level people, meaning people who are doers, people who are thinkers, not necessarily people who are well educated. I think of my father, and I am educated, but I think of people who are ready to think and to do and to connect with other people. So I'm going to pat, those are my last words here. But Paul, if you'd have last words, and then you, Harry, you get the last words, because this
like
is
that.
your show. So you,
No,
Paul,
over to you, Harry. Over to you.
Okay. So I think just basically our thing at the moment is just we need to reject this premise that whites are only allowed to be individuals and are not allowed to pursue their group interests. That's at the core of what we're doing. This we have to say, no, we have a group identity and we have group interests, and we should be allowed to pursue them. That's the core, my core message to anyone. Everyone else has it. Why can't we? And there's no good reason why not. So, and once we get to that point, once most people get to that point, we, you know, if we could get to that point tomorrow, we'd have this thing fixed by next weekend. Is what I think. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much, Elsa, for arranging this and putting it on. It's been
thank you
a
very much, Harry,
chance.
for being here. It's wonderful. You know, getting your, you know, where you are going with this. And I look forward to further developments. I really like that idea. We need to be, by the way, we also need to be individuals. That's one of the huge strengths of Europe, that we do think of ourselves as individuals. We act and as a group. It's not either or, it's both and. I am an individual and I belong to more than one group.
Yeah.
And it's positive, the groups I belong to. They add to, you know, and I've been trained to think of myself as a woman. Great, yes. But also it's good that I think of myself as a European, an Eastern European, a white. Very, very important. I don't know about a WASP or an Anglo, but that's you, Harry.
Yeah. Protestant, I'm sort of more agnostic. So, but white Anglo-Saxon, I guess, yeah, call it that. But I say, our definition of Anglo, we expand it considerably. You know, I know it's to some people Anglo means someone from England, but we say, like in Australia here, people who've come in from other European countries and assimilated into that Anglo culture and are, for all intents and purposes, indistinguishable. You know, have Irish people who've, you know, their grandparents came over and today they have an Irish name, but their foreground identity is as part of Anglo-Australia. So we class them all as Anglos, you know, like yourself, Elsa, we class you as Anglo. Where are you from originally, Paul? Are you English originally?
I'm 100% English.
Right. Whereabouts in England are you
I was born in London, then we moved to
Right.
Suffolk, and I
Right.
studied at Canterbury in Kent.
Lovely.
Okay, and there's a minor sort of Welsh element to my childhood as well, but
Right.
that's it. And then I gave up my favorite subject, history, in order to learn German. And I later went to Germany, and as I said, I spent 40 years there. I'm now fully fluent in German. You know, I'm accepted as German, de facto as German among Germans. But now I'm in France, and it's a bit more difficult because simply because I don't have the same command of the language.
Yeah.
Well, what I am going to do is I am going to round it up now. So thank you, both of you, for being here and your thoughts on it. And onward and I don't know, but upward, onward, and may we succeed.
Yeah. Good luck.